Psychopharmacology. I'm Dr. Dr. Bruce Bradway. Let me show you how we are going to run this thing. We have 8 weeks, I guess. I think we have 8 weeks left. Yes, go away. There we go. Okay. Psych 360. It will be completely online. Um, let's see what we have to do to pass this class. Here's the textbook right here. Uppers, downers, all arounders. Physical and mental effects of psychoactive drugs. This is the 8th edition. Actually, I've been using this book for about 25 years. I was teaching psychology up at Fort Belknap Reservation in Montana at Fort Belknap College. It is now Ani Nakota College, but we were partnered with Sadus Kootenai College in Pueblo, Colorado. Pablo, I'm sorry, Pablo, Montana, on the Flathead Reservation. They had a bachelor's degree in social work. They also have a bachelor's degree in psychology, but we were sending students from Fort Belknap was just a 2-year college, and we were sending students to Pablo to get their bachelor's degree in either social work, or they also had a certificate in drug counseling. And this is the textbook that they used, Uppers, Downers, All Arounders. It's one of the best um, textbooks in psychopharmacology, and I've been using it for 25 years. It's a very good book. What else do we know? Okay, there you go. There's the schedule. We will have 2 weeks, or I'm sorry. We'll be covering a chapter every week. There's 8 in the book, 9 in the book actually. Is that right? Yeah. Week 5 we'll tackle chapter 5 and 6, and then in week 8 we'll tackle chapter 9, and then we'll talk about psychotropic medications, pharmaceuticals. Most of these are about illicit drugs. Okay, so how do we pass the class? Well, there will be 10 chapter tests worth 20 points each. There is a 5-page paper worth 100 points, and then there are article critiques every week about something that deals with psychopharmacology, and that is it. That's how we pass. And I do count lines in the library paper. Don't try to use an AI. Don't try to use AI because I can detect it. It's actually quite simple. Okay. Anyway, there you go. Okay, that's how we're going to do it. Wait a second there. I'm back again. So let's go ahead and start chapter 1, Psychopharmacology, the pharmacology of addiction. At present, there's a debate going on over the legalization of marijuana. It is now legal actually, it's illegal in almost all states. There are only 4 states where it is completely illegal. I've got a map right here. There you go. It's illegal in Idaho, Wyoming, Kansas, South Carolina, and actually it's legal in North Carolina now. You can only use medical marijuana in Texas, Iowa, Wisconsin, Indiana, Tennessee, and Georgia. There we go. Currently, the drug that seems to be causing the most serious problems is crystal methamphetamines and opiates and opioids, especially prescription opiates and opioids. Not only are we having trouble in North America, but also it's causing trouble in Europe and Asia. The most serious problem in the United States seems to be the use of prescription drugs. This is especially a problem with teenagers. The biggest killer among all the addictions is smoking of tobacco. States are increasing the limits to public smoking. Actually, it's not easy to be a smoker these days. Hard to find some place to smoke. The use of performance-enhancing drugs in sports has been an issue since the home run race between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa in 1999. Neither of these individuals are in the Hall of Fame despite their prolific home run hitting. And also the number one home run hitter of all time in Major League Baseball is also not in the Hall of Fame. That would be Barry Bonds. It is accepted that steroids can cause damage, but new generations of performance enhancers have hit the sports scene that do questionable damage and are undetectable through drug testing. And of course, the question is, what will you do to be a success in athletics? Will you shorten your life by using steroids or any other performance enhancing drugs? There has been an immense growth of computer games, cell phone usage, and other online problems such as pornography. With the increase of technology, psychologists have been behind the addiction power curve in identifying problems that people are having. Um, One problem that we may have in the future is AI. No one can anticipate what's going to happen, and it may turn out ugly. Early man saw his world as mysterious and dangerous, and they had a basic need to cope with his environment. Early man discovered that by ingesting certain plants, they could ease their fear and anxiety, reduce pain, treat some illnesses, give them pleasure, and assist them to talk with their gods. The human brain responds to psychoactive substances, obviously. When people suffer from mental illnesses or behavioral addictions, the altered state of consciousness makes the individual feel better. Psychoactive substances make the individual feel better, otherwise, they wouldn't use them voluntarily. Governments, ruling classes, and religious entities have sought to control the supply of drugs through growing, manufacturing, distribution, taxing, and prohibition. Ancient Sumerian medicine men used opium as a secret medicine. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt would dole out beer to keep their laborers building pyramids. Coca leaves were controlled and doled out by the Incan rulers in Peru to maintain needed laborers in the country that they controlled. After the Spanish conquered the Inca, they controlled the growing of coca leaves to increase tax revenues. The American revolutionaries exported and taxed whiskey and tobacco to keep finance, to help them finance the revolution. We had no other means of making money except tobacco and whiskey. Technology allowed addictive substances to change, improve, and strengthen potencies over the centuries. Alcohol was first distilled to heighten the potency in Arabia in the 10th century. That's the area that is now Saudi Arabia. Morphine was first refined from opium in Germany in 1804. Cocaine was first refined from coca leaves in Germany in 1859. An automatic cigarette rolling machine was invented in the United States in 1881. Before that, there were no cigarettes. If you smoked, most people chewed tobacco, but most people smoked cigars. Most men, women didn't smoke cigarettes or chew tobacco. The stimulant amphetamine was first synthesized in Germany in 1887 to replace ephedra. It was synthesized in Japan in 1919. LSD was first synthesized in Switzerland in 1938. And that's the guy that did it. Sinsemilla growing techniques were first used in the United States to increase the THC level of marijuana in the 1960s. The THC content of marijuana is 14 times stronger today than it was in the 1970s. The amphetamine molecule was first modified to produce designer drugs such as MDMA in the United States in 1910. Faster and more efficient methods of putting drugs into the body has intensified the effects. In 4000 BC, Sumerians mixed opium with alcohol to produce a stronger effect. It was discovered that the absorptive effects of coca leaves could be intensified if the leaf was mixed with charred oyster shells in Peru in 1450. In England in 1800, aficionados discovered that they felt giddy and high from inhaling nitrous oxide. In 1900, Europeans discovered that if you snorted cocaine, they would absorb the drug more quickly. In the United States, users discovered that they could intensify the high of crack cocaine by smoking the rocks in the 1970s. Within the last decade, users have discovered that they could get a bigger rush from select time-release pain relievers, OxyContin and hydrocodone, by crushing the tablets and injecting them directly into the bloodstream. Over 4,000 plants have been identified as yielding psychoactive substances. 60 of those have been in continuous use somewhere in the world throughout history. Opium poppies, marijuana tops, coca leaves, tea leaves, betel nuts, cot leaves, coffee beans, tobacco leaves, fruits, and other plants that can be used to manufacture alcohol. There's evidence that select groups of Neanderthal in Europe used fly agaric mushrooms to produce hallucinogenic effects for shamanistic rituals. Many of the first cultures considered alcoholic beverages, especially wine, as a gift from the gods. Egyptians, Osiris, Greeks, Dionysus, Romans, Bacchus. The Bible has 150 references to alcohol. Most are warning against its use. Opium has been cultivated in the civilized world for over 6,000 years. In ancient Egypt, 5,000 years ago, opium was used to treat mental illness and to quiet crying babies. Cannabis sativa has been grown as hemp for thousands of years. The plant has been used mainly for its fiber in manufacturing rope, but also for its medicinal and hallucinogenic properties. Mescal beans, peyote cacti, and psychedelic mushrooms have been used for their hallucinogenic properties for thousands of years. Mostly used by shamans for visions, these drugs have been used in both North and South America. The psilocybin mushroom was preferred by the Aztecs and the Mayan cultures. Of the 30,000 species of mushrooms in North America and South America, only 80 produce the hallucinogens psilocybin and psilocin. Tobacco cultivation and use dates back 7,000 years in North America. Looking at the substance from a survival point of view, its strong alkaloid properties not only made it noxious to herbivores, but it gave it the properties that humans seek. And it is these alkaloid properties that makes it so destructive. Archaeological evidence from South America shows that coca leaves have been prized by the indigenous people there for at least 5,000 years. Evidence seems to indicate that they gave it to the dying to ease their journey into the afterlife. Other drugs used by the ancients include members of the nightshade family, Salacinaceae, which contains the chemical atropine and scopolamine. During the Dark Ages, people who used these drugs were accused of witchcraft, the medicinal qualities being ascribed to the demonic possession of collusion. Datura, and I can tell you what they what they thought that the witches were doing. They had brooms, and they would take the nightshade and they would rub it on the broom, and then when they flew the broom as a flying implement, they wouldn't wear underwear, so that they were rubbing their uh, vaginal area against the stick and causing them to have hallucinations, and that's one of the reasons that they accuse them of witchcraft. Datura, also known as thornapple, is sometimes made into a salve and absorbed through the skin. Henbane has been used as far back as ancient Egypt, 3,500 years ago. It was used as a painkiller and a poison. In ceremonies, it was used to induce insanity, which in turn produced hallucinations that resulted in prophecies. Belladonna, which means beautiful woman in Italian and Latin, is also known as witch's berry and devil's herb. This drug dilates the pupils, inebriates the user, and can cause hallucinations and delirium. You may know belladonna as amaryllis, the flower amaryllis. The mandrake is also known as mandragora. The root of the plant often grows in the shape of a man and was used in ancient Greece to make prophecies. The drug causes hallucinations and delirium. The 15th century in Italy, it was used as an aphrodisiac. One of the stranger psychoactive drugs is ergot, a brownish purple fungus that causes cereal grain rust, especially on rye, but also on wheat, barley, and triticale. The active ingredient in ergot that causes the problems is lysergic acid diethylmide, also known as LSD. Outbreaks of ergot in Europe and rye growing areas have caused widespread insanity and death. One outbreak in France in 944 is reputed to have killed 40,000 people. The first written use of caffeine came from the Olmecs 3,500 years ago, who used coca, chocolate, to produce a stimulating but bitter drink. Tea was cultivated 1,700 years ago in China and has been used in Eastern Asia ever since. Coffee was first cultivated about 1,200 years ago in Arabia. The invasion of the Americas by the Europeans opened up new markets for psychoactive substances as the European and American people traded their addictive substances back and forth. Coffee, alcohol, and tea were brought to the Americas, and coca and tobacco was taken back to Europe. Ritualized use of stimulants became part of each culture. Opium came back to Europe in the form of a medication known as theriac, which saw opium mixed with some 70 to 100 other medications. Eventually, in the 16th century, a stronger version of opium began to be used as a tincture of opium became quite popular. A substance known as laudanum was used for everything from a sleep inducer to a painkiller to a treatment for alcoholism. Laudanum is tincture of opium. Tincture means that it's mixed with alcohol, so it's alcohol and opium put together. In the early 1600s, a new drink was invented in Holland. It's known as gin. Because of the contamination of the water supply in Europe, only alcoholic beverages could be drunk with impunity. Everything else was contaminated with human feces. This new drink was colorful, was flavorful, easy to make, and it was inexpensive. It became the drink of choice among the poor in England. Quickly, alcoholism rates and mortality due to drinking skyrocketed in the back alleys of London. England's growing population stopped growing due to the deaths. Attempts to regulate gin production and distribution led to riots. Production rates septupled. Septupled means it was multiplied by 7. Finally, in 1751, new laws were passed and gin consumption returned to less deadly levels. Here's a drunk lady who loses hold of her baby, and her baby falls to its death. Quite a picture. Still, control of psychoactive drug use was sporadic throughout the world. Nitrous oxide, or laughing gas, inhaling parties were not uncommon in Victorian England, though the practice sometimes resulted in more fighting than laughing. Morphine was about 10 times as potent as opium. Morphine was used during the Crimean and Civil Wars. Crimean War was in the 1850s. Civil War was from 1861 to 1865. Uh, and morphine was used to treat wounded casualties. Many men became addicted to the painkiller after these wars. Opium became dangerous to life and limb with the development of morphine, but it would get worse. In 1855, the hypodermic needle was invented, making it possible to inject morphine. In 1874, morphine was synthesized into diacetyl morphine or heroin. Heroin was 2 times and 5 times stronger uh, than morphine. Opium became involved in one of the oddest events in the history of psychoactive substances. The British were addicted to the caffeine in tea, but the Chinese demanded silver bullion to buy it. The British had no commodity that the Chinese wanted, that the Chinese would buy was silver. The Chinese had eradicated opium smoking from their country in around 1000 AD. In 1839, the British battled the Chinese to open their ports to the opium trade. The Chinese lost the war in 1842. A second opium war was fought from 1856 to 1860 to open more Chinese markets for the trade. The Chinese lost again. Trade went from 15 tons in 1800 to 2.5 million tons by the turn of the 20th century. The British had cheap tea and the Chinese had a new addiction. Actually, it was an old addiction. They had eradicated it in 1000 AD, but now they had it again. Thank you, England. In 1859, cocaine was synthesized from the coca leaf. It quickly became a new medicine. It was used as a topical anesthetic and used for eye surgery. It was mixed with wine to make a new, stronger concoction. It was used by Freud to control asthma, gastric problems, as an aphrodisiac, and to relieve depression. Now, one of the things you need to remember about Freud was that he was not only the first psychiatrist, but he was also a brain surgeon. So he was a medical doctor as well. And that's one of the reasons why he treated asthma, gastric problems, and also as a psychological medication, a psychotropic medication. During the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, many patented medicines were manufactured with what would become illegal drugs. Coca-Cola was first manufactured with 5 milligrams of cocaine and continues to contain coca extract with the cocaine removed. Coca-Cola continues to be the largest purchaser of Trujillo coca leaf. So Coca-Cola actually does mean cocaine cola. But all this, and of course, they replaced the cocaine with caffeine, and that's why there's a lot of caffeine in Coca-Cola. But all was not paradise in the alcohol-soaked United States. Drunk and high men made poor workers and worse husbands. Inebriation impeded responsibility, and abuse among drinkers was quite common. The first temperance organization was started in the United States in 1826. To understand why temperance was so widely accepted in the United States, we have to understand that the woman's lot in the early 19th century. Contraception was illegal in the United States, so women tended to be pregnant almost constantly. The drinking pattern in the United States followed the path of cheapest booze. Corn liquor was least expensive, so men tended to drink voluminous amounts of whiskey. Women saddled with a sporting husband were likely to raise their children in poverty and have to accept his drunken abuse. U.S. consumption of alcohol in 1830 was 7.1 gallons of pure ethanol for each citizen compared to 1.8 gallons today. That's a lot of booze. That's over 3 times as much. The first state to prohibit the sale of alcohol was Maine in 1851. By 1855, 1/3 of the states in the United States had laws controlling the sale and use of alcohol. By 1920, enough states, 33 out of 48, limited the use of alcohol to lead the passage of the Volstead Act prohibiting the manufacture or sale of alcohol. But alcohol wasn't the first psychoactive substance regulated. In 1909, the Opium Exclusion Act was passed banning the importation of opium into the United States for use other than medicine. In 1914, the Harrison Narcotic Act was passed labeling opium as a narcotic to be controlled by the federal government. Before 1914, opium wasn't controlled. While Volstead Act was repealed in 1933, other psychoactive substances have been added to the list of controlled substances in the United States. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was passed banning the use and cultivation of cannabis. In 1965, drug abuse control amendments regulated the manufacture of stimulants and depressants. In 1970, the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act consolidated all the drug legislation so that they would be controlled out of the same office. In 1984, the legal drinking age was raised to 21. Before that, it was whatever the state wanted it to be. Most states had drinking ages of 21, but some of them had lower ages like 18. I lived in Indiana. Indiana had a drinking age of 21, but across the border in Ohio, it was 18. Did the Volstead Act work? The answer really all depends on who was answering it. Good things that transpired from prohibition. We had prohibition from 1920 until 1933. So for 13 years, alcohol was prohibited in the United States. That's the prohibition that they talk about so much. So what are the good things that happened during Prohibition, those 13 years? Cirrhosis of the liver and other alcohol-related diseases declined dramatically. Domestic violence fell. Violent crime actually fell by 2/3. Public drunkenness disappeared. But did it actually work? What negative things transpired that were directly related to the Volstead Act? Increase of organized crime, corruption of politicians, corruption of law enforcement personnel. Drinking eventually returned to pre-prohibition levels, but it took 20 years. And since the population had markedly increased, the amount of alcohol consumed was actually lower per person. So what's wrong with pot? Hemp was grown in the Americas with little problem until it first began to be smoked as a mild hallucinogen in Texas in 1910, from whence it spread to the rest of the West. In the 1930s, the Hearst newspaper ran a propaganda campaign to label marijuana as a narcotic. Part of the complaint with marijuana was that it was being brought into the United States by Mexicans, so it was a way to control the illegal entry of that population. Up to this point, of course, the movement of people across the southern border was not regulated. By 1936, 38 states had branded marijuana as one of the most dangerous drugs. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was passed, banning the growth of marijuana in the United States. Marijuana was used as a drug only in rural areas where it grew wild, and in the back rooms of cities where it was identified with jazz musicians and beat poets. And these are beat poets, actually, right here. That's Allen Ginsberg. That's the only one I really recognize. But the rest of these are beat poets. In the 1950s and 1960s, the influence of the beat poets' support of using psychoactive substances, including marijuana, as an act of rebellion caught on with the youth of that era. With the beginning of the Vietnam War, this is the time of the beatnik. You guys probably have no clue what I'm talking about. But if you watch television in the 1950s and 1960s, you would sometimes see people with cut-off sweatshirts and Van Dyke beards, maybe a mustache. If if you watch movies from the 50s and 60s, every once in a while you'll see somebody in black clothes or gray clothes, and they look like a bum, or they're wearing a beret. And those people were known as beatniks, and they listened to poets, and theoretically they smoked marijuana and just were out to have a good time. They later became hippies during the Vietnam War. With the beginning of the Vietnam War, the anti-war movement became intermingled with the youthful rebellion, which by this time was connected to, marijuana usage. Amphetamines were first synthesized in 1887 in Germany. Over the years, the substance was used as an inhaler under the name Benzedrine and as an appetite suppressant. In other words, weight loss pills. During World War II, amphetamines were used to combat fatigue by both sides. Actually, it was used by the Japanese, the Germans, and by the Allies during World War II, especially the Americans. As a matter of fact, before World War II, my dad drove ammunition trucks. This is in the 1940s. He drove ammunition trucks from northern Indiana to southern Indiana. And he would be on a 12-hour shift, sometimes on an 18-hour shift, and they would give him amphetamines to take, but he didn't really use it. He used caffeine to control his to keep him awake. In the 1950s and 1960s, amphetamines were used in diet pills. By 1970, it was estimated that 6 to 8% of Americans were using diet pills. I apologize for this picture. She is naked on top, and he's painting a flower on her breast. Amphetamines were part of the fuel of the hippie movement and the Summer of Love in 1967. Congress passed the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act of 1970. And part of the reason they did that was to control the youth movement and to control the hippies and the anti-war agitators. If they found any drugs on them, then they could arrest them, and they made these huge busts. Sports were pretty much the purview of the wealthy and the extremely gifted through the first half of the 20th century. It wasn't important enough to try to cheat or to gain an advantage. This is Johnny Weissmuller, who later became Tarzan. With the Cold War after World War II, every field where the free world met the communist world became a battlefield of sorts. The world of sports, and especially the Olympics, became a very contentious area of conflict. Eastern Bloc countries, led by the example of East Germany, began giving their athletes anabolic steroids, creating super athletes. The world was appalled by the results and came out against the practice in 1968. Since then, all amateur athletic organizations have banned the use of steroids, along with the professional athletic organizations around the world. And this is a lady that held the shot put record, and this is the lady later, because she was given so many steroids that it changed her into a man. Sedatives have been used since the beginning of the 20th century in the form of bromides, chloral hydrate, and paraldehyde. Barbital was marketed as Veronal in 1903. Phenobarbital was developed in 1913. Sedatives became very popular during the Depression and World War II eras, peaking in this time period with over 50 different barbiturates dominating the market. In the 1950s, doctors realized that they had not only overprescribed the drugs, but they had created a whole generation of addicted adults. In the 1950s and 1960s, a whole group of mild tranquilizers were developed to replace the more dangerous tranquilizers. Miltown and benzodiazepines such as Librium, Valium, Xanax, Klonopin, and Halcyon became the most widely used drugs in the world. Ergot, barley rust, had created havoc wherever it appeared, and no one knew why until Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann isolated the active ingredient lysergic acid diethylamide from the fungus. After his discovery, Hoffman accidentally dosed himself and discovered the psychedelic effects of the substance. Strangely, if it gets into any mucous membrane, it will travel to the brain, and that's what happened with Hoffman. He got it in his eye, and then he started hallucinating. The U.S. Army and the CIA bought the rights to LSD from Hoffman and experimented with the drug through the 50s and into the 1960s. One of the researchers working with the CIA was Dr. Timothy Leary of Harvard, who decided that the psychedelic substance needed to be shared with the world, and so he did. And that's how it got out. Before that, it was a controlled substance. Nobody knew what LSD was because they wanted to use it as a weapon. CIA wanted to use it as a weapon, but Timothy Leary released it to the world, and then it became part of the youth movement. 1.5 billion people drink alcohol around the world. 76 million of these people have an alcohol abuse disorder. You know, 180 million people worldwide use illicit drugs. 160 million people worldwide smoke marijuana each year. It has been estimated that 20 to 60% of all hospital beds are inhabited due to drug abuse, and that's one of the reasons, working in medicine for 30 years, um, I'm not real happy with the whole idea of drugs because they certainly get in the way of trying to treat people who actually uh, have medical problems that need to be taken care of. Of course, addiction is a medical problem, but that's usually it exacerbates whatever other medical problem you're dealing with. And sometimes that's the only problem that they have, but you don't know it because they won't tell you. Illicit drugs figure into the economic structures both where they are grown and where they are used. Heroin, cocaine, marijuana, MDMA, ecstasy, and methamphetamines. Illegal heroin is grown in 4 areas of the world. The Golden Crescent is an area in Southwest Asia that encompasses areas of Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan. And of course, we were just in this area, and now we are fighting in Iran. So now you know where Iran is. We were fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan with Iran in between. Iran is right there. And this is the famous Strait of Hormuz, right there. That's where all the oil, 30% of the world's oil passes through this strait every day. And it is blocked right now because Iran can't. The Golden Triangle encompasses parts of Southeast Asian countries, Thailand, Myanmar, which is they formerly called it Burma, and Laos. And this is it right here. This is the Golden Triangle. This is what Vietnam was all about. Mexico exports a form of heroin that is dark in color and called black tar or brown heroin. Colombia not only exports cocaine to the United States, but a white heroin as well. White heroin found in the Golden Triangle, Golden Crescent in Colombia is a purer, stronger heroin than the brown heroin from Mexico. 90% of the world's supply of illicit heroin comes from the poppy fields of Afghanistan. 60% of Afghanistan's wealth comes from opium sales, and U.S. efforts to curb production has resulted in an increase by 50%. Whoops. The Nationalist Chinese under Chiang Kai-shek and his Kuomintang party dealt with the drug tongs of Shanghai while they controlled China. After the Kuomintang were expelled from China, they continued to grow and market opium along the Thai-Burma border in order to buy weapons for their defense against the communists. So this is a legitimate government where drug trade. Well, you remember the Brits did this to the Chinese. They forced heroin on the Chinese. This is part of the geopolitics of international politics. The United States became the United States by smuggling alcohol, by smuggling whiskey when it was when they weren't supposed to. So the United States is based on the sale of alcohol. China and Southeast Asia are based on the smuggling of heroin throughout the world. And now, of course, we're doing something strange in the Caribbean and up the West Coast. We're bombing ships or boats that are carrying heroin supplies or cocaine. We're not exactly sure what. We just blow them out of the water. This has been going on for, well, at least 200 years. A lot of the rich families in England made their money off of heroin, actually, selling it to the Chinese for tea. And that's where their wealth came from. A lot of the American families became wealthy by smuggling alcohol during Prohibition. So where does money come from? Well, one place it comes from is drugs. The Vietnam War was a quagmire. Not only was the war being fought in the Golden Triangle, but the United States allied itself with some of the most notorious drug smugglers in the area, the Hmong and the Ho. These are tribal groups, the Hmong and the Ho. The Hmong were excellent allies against the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong as they moved freely through Thailand and Laos and Vietnam and fought the communist soldiers who encroached in their area. A lot of these people were brought back to the United States after the war by the CIA. And if you have ever seen the movie, what is it, Trans Am? Is that it? Trans Am? With Clint Eastwood, the people that he's dealing with are the Hmong. And they were guerrillas that we hired. And actually, the reason they were such good guerrillas is because they'd been smuggling drugs in that area for centuries. Cocaine doesn't grow just anywhere. Cocaine grows mainly in the humid mountain valleys of Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia. Cocaine has been at the forefront of the political problems in Colombia for over half a century. Drug cartels operate with impunity throughout the country and control many of the decisions being made locally and nationally. Okay, one of the things that you may or may not know, you probably don't know this, they keep talking about it. The president of Honduras was a drug smuggler. He was arrested and put in jail, and Donald Trump commuted his sentence. Um, Manuel Noriega in Panama was arrested and died in jail as a drug smuggler. Um, this is a problem that we see in South and Central America. Many of the governments are based on drug smuggling, on drug production and drug smuggling, and this is one of the and every once in a while we decide that they shouldn't be doing it, and the rest of the time we support them making a lot of money, and we allow them to produce the substances. Uh, do are any of the countries legitimate? Of course they are. Their governments are legitimate. Legitimate was England legitimate in forcing the Chinese to take heroin as a commodity? This is part of politics. We talk about oil, but we should also be talking about drugs, the geopolitics of drugs, because it's been around for a long, long time. So one country isn't, there are no innocent countries, let's say that. CIA has used drug smuggling to finance this and that and the other. So we're not completely innocent in this. we're now also not just the victims. Worldwide, 25 million, that's the size of Texas plus Montana. People have died from AIDS, and another 40 million, that's California plus Oregon, are infected with HIV. In the United States, around 900,000, that's the size of Montana, people are infected with HIV, while 500,000, the population of Seattle, have died of AIDS. When the AIDS epidemic first hit in 1982 and 1983, it was mostly caused by unsafe sex between homosexual males. But in time, it spread into the intravenous drug injecting population and now is more likely to be contracted by sharing contaminated needles than any other cause. So it's not just in the gay community, it's also in the heterosexual community, and it has to do with intravenous drug use. Hepatitis C is a liver infection that infects 4 million people. That's the population of Los Angeles. 85 to 90% of all intravenous drug users are infected with the hepatitis C virus, mostly from sharing their needles. And this happened to a student of mine when I was up in Montana. A friend of hers found her stash and used her, shot up with what she found. And unbeknownst to her, to my student, she used the same needle. And now both of those individuals have hepatitis C. We can treat hepatitis C now. It's about 5 years ago they came up with a treatment that actually worked. Before that, there was nothing we could do. Ever since the roaring 20s, people have been mixing the coolest of music with psychoactive drugs. In the 20s, it was jazz mixed with cocaine and bootleg liquor. The women were called flappers, and the men were referred to as jazz bows. There's a jazz bow right there, and she doesn't look like much of a flapper. They actually wore straight dresses and bound their breasts so that they looked like prepubescent females. In the 1950s, the music was the blues. The psychoactive drug was heroin and whiskey. The men and the women were either called beats or beatniks because they were so cool, and they all wore the same kind of clothes. In the 1960s and 70s, the music became hard rock. The psychoactive drugs that fueled the music were LSD, speed, marijuana, and wine. The people were hippies, and the women were chicks. As we drifted into the new millennium, the music became techno or electronic trance music. The psychoactive drugs that fueled the craze were MDMA, marijuana, nitrous oxide, ketamine, GHB, and beer. The participants are referred to as ravers. Whoa, look at the ravers. Marijuana continues to create controversy, legalized in many states for medicinal purposes. People are required to have a prescription for its use. Marijuana continues to be the most widely used illegal drug throughout much of the world, including the United States, Canada, Australia, Mexico, and South Africa. The destructive effects of tobacco have prompted many countries to try to curb its use. Cuba banned smoking in public places. Ireland has banned smoking in pubs. In many states in the United States, smoking is banned in any public place. This includes Iowa, Illinois, Arizona, and Montana, of course. New Mexico as well, I think. The only place you can smoke are Indian casinos. As late as 1966, almost half the population smoked regularly, about 42.6%. By 2005, the percentage of regular smokers in the United States had declined to less than 1/4 of the adult population, 22.5%. This decline had much to do with the discovery that cigarettes contain many carcinogens that cause disturbing medical problems. 1,178 people die every day from the effects of smoking. A study in England showed that smoking can reduce life expectancy by 10 years. Despite the reduction of revenue for tobacco companies in the United States, they've been able to keep profits up by developing foreign markets in the third world. In the United States, tobacco manufacturers have tried to sustain their market by targeting females, minorities, and younger smokers. In 1998, tobacco companies agreed to pay $246 billion over 25 years for their illicit practices in the past. And of course, that has expired now. Worldwide, 33 million people use amphetamines or similar stimulant substances. In the United States, 16,000 meth labs were raided in 2004. However, meth labs have been partially controlled by controlling the precursor chemicals ephedrine and pseudoephedrine found in common cold remedies, and that's one of the reasons why your cold remedies are under lock and key. And this is in 2014. There were 9,338 meth labs in the United States, and the state that led the surge was Indiana, my home state. There you go. Missouri's number 2, I think. I'm living in Iowa right now. There was 143 meth labs. As a matter of fact, I live just south of a town called Maquoketa. And Maquoketa was the meth capital of Iowa. It's right, I can show you where it is. It's about right there. Why? Because it's close to Chicago. Chicago's right there. It's also equidistant to Minneapolis and Milwaukee and Kansas City. It's right there. St. Louis is right here, but it's right there. So it's kind of equidistant from all those large metropolises. Treatment for amphetamine usage has skyrocketed in the past decade. In 1993, only 21,000 people sought treatment for amphetamine addiction. This figure had increased to 151,000 by 2004. Other stimulants also make an impact on our lives. The use of caffeine in recent years has been increased markedly. Coffee kiosks have sprung up in tiny towns, and sales of caffeinated soft and energy drinks have exploded. 18% of teens, about 4,300,000, abused Vicodin in the form of hydrocodone in 2004. Hydrocodone is the most widely used and abused prescription opiate. 10%, 2,300,000 teens, abused the opiate Percodan in the form of OxyContin, the time-released version of oxycodone. And I'll have to admit, drugs do equal sexy. Alcohol directly kills 75,000 people in the United States every year. Alcohol directly kills 1.8 million people worldwide every year. 17.6 million Americans have an alcohol abuse disorder. That is 8.5% of the adult population. Alcoholics make up 10 to 15% of people in the hospitals, 10 to 20% of people in nursing homes. When MRIs were done on gamblers, the portions of the brain that were activated by winning and losing were the same areas that were activated by cocaine. Statistics show that 2.5 million Americans are classified as pathological gamblers. 3 million Americans are classified as problem gamblers. 15 million Americans are at risk for problem gambling. One study in Minnesota in 2004 found that 1% of the gamblers accounted for 50% of the wagers. In the same year, among the riverboats of Illinois, 10% of the gamblers accounted for 80% of the revenues. While gambling may be the most economically devastating behavioral addiction, there are others that are equally personally devastating: compulsive overeating, anorexia, bulimia, internet addiction, sexual addiction, excessive TV addiction, compulsive shopping, and pornography addiction. No, I must have my computer. And that is it. That's chapter one, end of chapter 1. We'll tackle chapter 2. Chapter 2 deals with how psychoactive substances actually work on your body. So I'll see you next week.